Hello world and welcome to Web Dev Frontiers. My name is Tamas and I'm here to share my experience with you in web technologies. And in today's video, we're going to take a look at 5 HTML elements that are not getting as much love as they're supposed to get. These are going to be the dialog, the various input type attributes, the meter, the picture, and the data list elements. So let's dive straight in. The first element that I would like to talk about is called the dialog element. Now, oftentimes when you would like to add a dialog or a model window to your web application, you need to reach for a third-party dependency. Luckily, there is a native HTML element called the dialog, which gives you a very similar, sometimes exactly the same functionality that you would get from any third-party service. So let's take a look at this. Inside my HTML, I have a dialog element, and for this very first example, I have attached the open attribute to it. What this is going to do is open up the dialog straight away when the HTML file loads in the browser. In between the dialog elements, you can then have any content and you can style that content in any way that you see fit. And in this case, I just added an H1 and an image element. And I also have a form with a special method attribute, which is set to be dialog. Simply put, this just allows us to close the model. All right, let's take a look at this particular page in the browser. And as you can see, immediately as the page loads, I see a model window. I get the H1, I get the image, and I get the close button. Also note that you can style the dialog element by applying usual CSS statements to it. So in this case, I made the edges round and I also applied a drop shadow effect. And of course, now if I click this close button, the dialog element disappears. This is awesome, but let's take a look at yet another example where we're going to programmatically open and close the dialog element. In this example, I have created a button with the text open dialog. This is the button that we're going to use to open the dialog. And then I have the dialog content in here. Again, I have the method attribute on the form set to dialog so that the model will actually close. Now, let's take a quick look at the JavaScript itself. Because notice that when you add the click event listener for the button and you access the dialog element, you will have access to both the show and show model methods. So let's take a look at what is the difference between the two. So let's refresh the page and see what we get. I have added some placeholder text, and remember we now use the show method. So let's click on open dialog. And what we get is really just a dialog. It's not really a model window because it gets added to the bottom of the page. And the same style applies to it. Let's see how the behavior is going to be different if we call the show model method instead. So let's change this around, refresh the page again, click on open dialog, and then now we get a model that opens. Also notice that the background changes. And the reason for that is because I'm using the backdrop pseudo selector here on the dialog, and I'm setting the background color to be this transparent red color. So essentially with this technique, you can apply styles to whatever is behind the model. And also note that at this point, I cannot select any of the text that is behind the model window. Once I close it, the text now becomes selectable. And in the last example that I would like to show you, we're going to take a look at how to use some form values from the model and send that information back to the HTML page. So what I have now is an open dialog button just like before, and I also have an output element. This is where we're going to output the value from the form that is going to be displayed in the model. And in between the dialog elements, I have the usual H1, and now I've added a form, and I would like to draw your attention to the button form method attribute, which has its value set to dialog. Simply put, the form method attribute with the dialog value allows us to create an interactive form from the model and send data back from the model to the HTML. So let's look at the JavaScript and how this would work. So on the open button, we are again calling dialog show model as a click event handler. and we add two event listeners. One is for the confirm button that is going to be inside the dialog here. So we basically pick a particular Star Wars character, and if we hit confirm, we're going to prevent the default from behavior, and we're also going to call dialog.close. So dialog.close will close the model in this case, and as an optional argument, we can pass it a return value. And in this case, the return value is going to be the value from the select element. And last but not least, we also attach an event listener to the dialog close event, and we basically grab the return value again if one was set and add that to the output value. So all in all, if I now click confirm once I've selected a particular character, and it's going to show up in the output element as you see it on my screen. The next example that I would like to talk about is not really an HTML element, but rather an HTML attribute value or a set of values that are being underused. And I'm talking about the input type attribute. Now, I'm pretty sure that most of you are familiar with input type text, input type password, or even input type file, but there are a lot of additional values that you can give the input type. And there's a very good reason why you should do that, which I'm going to reveal to you in just a second. So as you can see, I have a form with a number of input elements here, and they all look slightly different. So let's go through these. The very first one is input type number. So this particular input type will allow me to add a number into the input box. And if I click into this input field now in the browser, you can see that I get these up and down arrows, only allowing me to enter particular numbers. Okay, let's take a look at the second one, which is input type TEL, telephone number. So in this particular example, I can set up a regular expression as well by using the pattern attribute to match any regular expression that I want to make sure that the phone number is in fact going to be entered in a valid way. Furthermore, I've also added some CSS, and you can handle the invalid and valid states for the input elements. So as you can see, I have a thumbs down because the field is required and it doesn't match the pattern that I have specified here. So let's try to add something that doesn't match that. And I still get thumbs down. But the moment I change this first number to either an 8 or a 9, this now passes a test and this phone number is correct. The next one is an email address, and I just noticed that is a quick typo, so let's just say this is enter your email address. So let's refresh that. The input type value is now set to email, but if I click in this input box, nothing really happens. But just to let you know, there's some client-side validation. So if I were to submit this form, this would come up as an incorrect email address. Now, let me also make a very important point here. Having browser-based and client-side validation of your data is great, but you should never ever solely rely on that. For example, I could very easily open up DevTools, change the input type value from email to just text, and send any sort of arbitrary text to your server. So you have to make sure that you take a look at the data that comes in from the forms on the server side as well. Then the next input type is the date time -local. And as you can see, that allows me to pick a date and a time, and I get this very nice selector. Again, remember, this is built into HTML. There's nothing that I had to install. There are no third-party dependencies. So I get this selection of a date, and I can select a particular time as well. I can always click today, and then now that is going to be set. Please remember that there is a standard way how the data is going to be sent or how it's going to be stored when you access this. So it's going to be in the year, month, day, date format, regardless of how it appears in here inside this input element. And the next one is input type URL. Again, in the browser, I don't see anything apart from the fact that there would be some client-side validation, but there's a reason why I have these input type values, and I'm going to show those to you in just a moment. And then last but not least, input type equals to color, spelled in the American way, so COLOR, it brings up a nice little color selector. So I can select any color and I can now, save this and process this in JavaScript, for example. So these are all great, but why am I talking about this? Well, even though you have some nice client-side validation for the number here or a regular expression matching inside the browser, the real power for these attribute values shows when you open up this page in your mobile browser. Let me show you why. So I have my mobile phone screen shared with you, and I'm going to tap into the phone number field, for example. And what I would like you to note is that the keyboard matches the type of input that I've specified. So I only get the keys on my keyboard that help me enter a phone number. If I tap into an email address, I now get the @ symbol, for example, on a keyboard. So again, I get a custom keyboard to help me enter the email address faster. The session time or the datetime picker, that works as well. So I get the standard iOS datetime picker. And of course, for the URL, guess what? I can get a customized keyboard to help me enter the URL very, very fast. So wouldn't it be nice that websites would do this? How many times have you registered on a website where you had to enter an email address, you had to enter a phone number, and you got the full keyboard, and you always mistype the email address, you always mistype some bits and pieces of your phone number? This is the solution. Now, I deliberately didn't tap into the number. So let's actually do that, see what happens on my phone. So surprisingly, I get numbers, but I can also change back to the alphabet. So why is that? Well, the reason for this is because if you think about a number could contain a dot, a number could contain a comma, for example. So the keyboard allows me to enter those as well. However, if you know that you are only asking your users to enter a number, you can change the input element like so. So let me just make this quick change in my code. And notice that now I've added a pattern so that I only allow to enter numbers from 0 to 9, no other special characters. So let's actually refresh the page on my mobile phone. And let's see if now, actually, I forgot to save this, apologies. So let's save the file, go into the browser, refresh the page, tap into that input field, and now I only get the keyboard that allows me to enter a number, nothing else. So this is the real power of using the appropriate values for the input attributes. The next example that I will share with you is the data list. So data list essentially acts as a select element. The only difference is that it also allows you to enter your own custom selection. So if you think about a select element, you get a fixed set of items that you can pick from. With data list, you get the same, plus you also get an input field with which you can enter your own value. So I have an input element in here, and notice that I've added a list attribute to it called SW_characters, and then I'm referencing the same ID inside the data list element. And then in the data list, I give options with the value attribute in exactly the same way how I would do this using a select element. And basically what that gives me is this first selector, whereby if you click here, you get a couple of options. So I can pick any of the options that I've added, or I can add a selection on my own. And if I hit pick, then I'm going to get that custom selection. Or if I pick someone from the list, then of course that value is going to be picked up by JavaScript and by the browser. Okay, so the code behind this is relatively simple. All we need to do is add an event listener to the click button, and that is going to be able to read the value property of that data list. And the value property is going to be either a selection that you've done or the text that has been entered. Now, another very interesting use case that I would like to share with you is related to the fact that you can use the data list in conjunction with the input type attributes that we talked about in the previous section. So in the second example, notice that I have an input type color where I have a list with a value of pastel. And I also have a data list with the very same ID with a couple of HTML color codes. So essentially what is going to happen now, if I click on the color selector, is that I get some of the selected colors that I've added inside the data list as options. So this is good for situations when you want to offer a couple of predefined colors for users, or maybe you have a picture and you want to collect the predominant colors and you want them to see those and apply them somewhere. And of course, if we click other, then we are going to get the usual color selector. Okay, so there are many other use cases like this, but I also feel that the data list is being underutilized in HTML. So I'm hoping that these tricks will help you out. The fourth HTML element that I would like to talk about that is being a little bit underused is the meter element. Now, the meter element allows you to measure a scalar value. And here is an example of that where I've set a bunch of properties on my meter element, min and max. So these are ranging from 0 to 100. You can add any number that you want here. And then I'm specifying 3 attributes, low, high, and optimum. And these will also drive how the meter element is going to be displayed inside the browser. And then last but not least, we also have to give it a value. Now, just to let you know, optimum is going to be the color green, high is going to be this yellow orangish color, and then low is going to be a red color. Now, because I've set the value to be 100, you can see that the meter shows up in green. But the moment I put the value to be between 85 and 90, so let's actually do, maybe just do 85, then notice I still have green, but if I put it to 84, then this is now going to change to orange because now I am on the high. If I go on the low, so let's say I want to do 15 or 17, for example, then it will show up as red. Now, since I have battery level here, I thought I would show you an extra thing as well. So did you know that you can actually use the get battery methods inside JavaScript to read the current battery value of your device? And this is how you would do that. So I essentially select the meter element. I call navigator.getBattery, and you need to access the level property and multiply that by 100. And that's going to return you the exact percentage of your battery. So I can now take that value and assign that to the meter. So as opposed to assigning the value here statically, I can just remove that, make sure that the JavaScript is also added to my HTML. And if I refresh, I can tell you that my battery is at 80%, so it does show up correctly. You can use this meter element to do this trick if you want in your application. And the last element is my personal favorite, and this is the picture element. I really like this element because it gives you very interesting use cases and it is highly versatile. Now I'm going to show you 2 examples of using this picture element in HTML. The first example is going to be what you see on my screen at the moment. I have a picture element with 2 source elements and an image element as its children. And notice that the source elements have a media attribute or a media query essentially that uses the prefers color scheme dark and light queries. So with the picture element and by using this media query, you can actually display a different image if someone is using a light theme or someone is using the dark theme, or someone prefers the light theme or someone prefers the dark theme. And so what I'm doing here, I'm using a PNG file just for demonstration purposes. So I'm displaying this image if someone is using the dark theme, or I'm using a lighter image, which you will see in just a moment, if someone is using the light theme. Now, at the time of this recording, I already have the dark theme activated, so that's why you see dark.png. How do I then test what happens if someone is using the light theme? In a previous video, I talked about some hidden features in DevTools, and I'm going to expand on that by giving you another feature in DevTools. So let's open up DevTools and see how we can actually switch between the dark and light themes using that tool. So I have DevTools open. I'm going to click on these three dots and select Run Command. And in here, we're going to just look for prefers. And notice that the first option that comes up says emulate CSS prefers color scheme dark. And the second one is prefers color scheme light. So let's actually click on that. And then now the browser is going to emulate what happens if someone is using the light theme. And immediately we get a different image. Now, if we go back to that run menu again, so run command and just type in prefers and then go back to the color scheme dark, then we change back to the dark image. You probably could be wondering, why is this useful? Well, think about a scenario where you have a very dark background for people who prefer the dark theme, and you would like to display some logos, but the customer logos are also dark. So you may want to replace them with white ones. And subsequently, if someone is using the light theme, then those logos will not be visible. So you would like to display a dark one. You can achieve that using the picture element with the source elements and the media queries as I've set it up right here. Now, the other example that I would like to show you with the picture element is something very similar to this, which allows differential loading of images. So I have the picture element with two source elements and an image element again. And notice that the first source is pointing to an AVIF file, the second source points to a WebP file, and the third source, or the image element, points to a JPEG. Now, I'm not going to talk about web performance, maybe in a future video, but essentially what we're trying to do here is try to load the most optimal image format first. So if the browser understands AVIF, it is going to load the AVIF file from the source type here. If it doesn't understand it, then the browser will ignore this line and go to the next line and see if it can actually work with the WebP image format. If it can, it will display that. And if neither of these two options work, then we're going to very simply fall back to image.jpg. And JPEG is, of course, an image format that all browsers understand and can render. So let's take a look at how this would work. So let's save this file, refresh the browser, and I have an image. But let's take a look at the network panel here real quick, make this a little bit larger, to actually see what is the element that got loaded here. So you can see image.avif got loaded. No WebP, no JPEG, so we loaded the most optimal image format. Yet another DevTools hint for you. So let's go back to running a command and let's just type in AVIF. And here we have an option that says disable AVIF format. So let's click on that, refresh this page, and notice we have a different image now. And now we load the WebP version of that image. That's really cool. So we can verify that the picture element does work as intended. Now let's do the final test. Let's disable the WebP format as well, refresh the page, and now we get a third image, and we do in fact get our JPEG. So to summarize, the picture element can work with media queries, can load different image formats for web performance reasons. So it's a really, really versatile element. And I'm sure I'm going to end up talking about this a lot more in a future video as well. And that's it. These are the 5 elements in HTML that I feel are being underused. If you know any other elements that you think should have made the list, please let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, I sincerely hope that you found this video to be informational, and I would appreciate if you would give it a thumbs up. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.